No, I think it's pretty good as long as like you
It's
have
better.
like a window coming in, you get the natural light. It's nice. So Eric, what I'm curious to know like what were the gaps in fitness within the autism community that led to the creation of Autism Fitness like 20 years ago?
Yeah, the gap was fitness. The whole thing as far as I was, concerned. So I'll give the brief backstory. So I started out in personal training for general populations early in my career. Probably I was 20, 21, and I had started going to graduate school for behavior science, and I was recruited into a program working with teenagers on the autism spectrum, and they brought me into this really comprehensive program because they had never had any type of fitness program ongoing. It was kind of, oh, we did this sports program and it was so, or this didn't work out. And what I recognized, I recognized two things relatively early on. Thing number one was that there was no blueprint. There was no best practices model for integrating fitness programs for the autism population. And this is back in when I started 2002, 2003 ish. And the second thing was that fitness, it's still the issue today, and we can definitely get into that, largely ignored by not only therapists but also families. It just wasn't a thing at all. It wasn't a consideration. There were some like running clubs across the country, and there were adapted sports, but there was no, from my perspective, there was no, this is the step by step structured approach to integrating meaningful and effective fitness programs into this population. And I think it was, again, coming back to the considerations of why. Number one, prioritization. Like, if you think fitness is important, great, but then you have to integrate it. And the second is understanding the fundamentals of um, effective fitness programming also, and that's still a major issue, and something that I do a lot of education on now, because it's still a I won't even say relatively, it's still a very much misunderstood area of science and practice in that realm. You could say for the general population, but specifically, within the neurodivergent population.
So when you say there was like very little, if any, push for physical activity in a
Yeah,
neurodivergent population, what are some of the potentially like massive benefits that these folks can have? Is it a very similar thing to what a relatively healthy population would consider as well, just like feeling better, more focused day to day, and just obviously like the cardiovascular benefits are amazing of exercise?
sure. I think all of the same and a little bit more. There is, it's referred to as the as the 16-year gap. So there is a higher prevalence of stress and medical complications and unfortunately, shorter lifespan among the autism and neurodivergent population when compared with neurotypical peers or neurotypical people. And a lot of that comes back to lifestyle related issues. So this is, to my thinking, this is something that is inherently needed for everybody, but particularly for this population, because we do see a lot more contraindication by way of inactivity and certainly some of the dietary issues as well. An easy way to look at it is if you have two 75-year-olds, side by side, and you say this person has strength trained and eaten well and gotten adequate sleep for the past 30, 35, 40 years, and you have the other 75-year-old who hasn't done that. Take a poll of how many people think that the person who has strength trained and been physically active and eaten well for the last 35, 40 years is going to be in better shape, more capable, more independent, probably more acute cognitive functioning. I think that's very, very easy. It's easy conceptually, but then in practice, and that's where we'll probably wind up getting into this conversation. In practice, it's something that just isn't there. So if you bring this to somebody as a concept, like, okay, who's going to be in better shape, who's going to be more independent, who's going to have the better quality of life? Oh yeah, of course, the active 75-year-old. Okay, so why aren't we implementing this? Again, you could say this with any population, but specifically with the autism and neurodivergent population, because there are some very important, very real considerations and challenges when we're implementing fitness programs for this population. But you have to start with prioritization. Like, do we think it's important? Okay, great. What do we do next?
No, I love that. You're starting with like the needs analysis. That's like any good strength and conditioning program. When I was in my master's, one of my friends was doing her thesis on, I think it was judo and
Mm-hmm.
different mixed martial arts for autistic and neurodivergent populations. And I thought it was so brilliant. And it was like a statistical significance that like for people who are on the autism spectrum who did judo and mixed martial arts, their outcomes like at home and at school and in the workplace was just far greater. And it's like, and that was only acute. What can we do chronically? And I love the thing that you put about like two 75-year-olds. One is independent, one is lean and mean and feeling good, and the other one is
Yeah.
dealing with sarcopenia and osteoporosis and is not very independent.
Sure, and I think everybody has a reference point for that. Everybody has a relative for the most part, or you can walk down the street, particularly in the U.S. and say, okay, I can pick out two people who are geriatric. Okay, that one, is hitting the gym and they look great. When people's eyebrows go up and they say, you're how old? Those type of things. Yeah, well, what are the reasons? Typically, yeah, of course, genetics are going to play a factor, but the physically active person is going to be in a better situation all around than someone who is less active. I don't think that is a far stretch for most people to understand, and then we make that great leap to, okay, well, how do we do this for everybody?
So how did you begin to integrate this? When you started to do this in the early 2000s, like you were doing this like
Yeah.
with like school and everything, and you're like, okay, like now I would like to really help a much larger population. What did that look like?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I started out with a few teenagers, and I'm really grateful for my initial experience because it wasn't with individuals who were highly independent and highly capable and highly motivated. It was kind of the opposite. Um, Predominantly, nonverbal, a lot of behavioral dysregulation, behavioral challenges. And so early on, the programming that I developed or the strategies needed to work more or less universally because it wasn't as though, oh, well, I have, one or two individuals who really, want to do fitness and they're super people pleasers and they're totally motivated by this. So, drawing on the training that I was getting in applied behavior analysis and then taking the exercise science part of it, which I was still very green to fitness, but I am, decent enough background that I could put together an effective program there. So it was really a process of, and I didn't even recognize it at the time, creating an interdisciplinary model because it wasn't as easy as just saying, okay, well, we're going to take the squat, the press, the push up, the cable row, and here we go because you have a motivated individual. And the way that I go about describing it today is there are really three different types of motivation or three pillars of motivation to train. Well, train, working out, whatever uh, however we're defining it, to go in the gym and lift stuff. Number one is going to be body composition, obviously, gain muscle, lose fat. Second one is going to be sports performance. So you have someone who's either a competitive or a non-competitive athlete. So they're playing, basketball, baseball, basketball too. Good movie.
Yeah, the South Park
Baseball,
guys.
football. Yeah, exactly. Volleyball, but it could be, canoeing, cycling, running, whatever. But they're getting stronger, more powerful in the gym, so that it translates over to their, chosen sport or activity. We can call it also. And the third pillar there is going to be quality of life. The quintessential example, is, the grandmother who wants to pick up, her grandson or granddaughter without having low back pain, the person who's huffing and puffing when they're going up and down stairs. So, they're in the gym. They don't really care that much about body composition, although most people do, which is great. That's fine. But they really want to do it because, their knees hurt, their back hurts, and so they want to get stronger so they don't experience those things. The interesting thing about the majority of the autism population is they don't fall into one of those three motivational categories. So, because it's such an abstract, also, because they're not really playing sports, the quality of life one, that third motivational variable is not really tied to anything. So you have to make it meaningful for them. And that first one of body comp, they really, and I can't say this for all, absolutely, but, majority, speaking, for the, median, level individual diagnosed with autism, they don't really care about body composition. So now you have each of these three normal variables of motivation that are non-existent. So you have to figure out, okay, well, how do I make this accessible, and not only accessible to somebody, but how do I make it reinforcing for them as well when one of those three things are just not there?
So what's the what are some of the, I guess, strategies which you have implemented which does help someone on the autism spectrum disorder really get involved and
Yeah,
excited and driven to do physical activity, which
yeah,
understandably it's like lifting weights even isn't even like the most fun thing for anyone on this planet, because be like,
sure.
oh, it burns, it hurts, and I'm like, okay, I
Yeah,
understand, maybe you'd rather do something else. So what's your strategy?
yeah. I would say that most people who train don't even necessarily like to train. They're doing it for one of those three reasons, and then there are people like us who actually like to go lift. We enjoy the process. We enjoy the activity for the sake of the activity, in addition to the other things that it affords. And so the key is to build in meaningfulness to it. And meaningfulness is one word. I think I just divided it into two for some reason. But building in meaningfulness to it, and that's not an esoteric philosophical thing. It's like you literally have to connect the squat or the press or the push up or the row or the heavy carry, whatever that exercise is, to something that is reinforcing. And that's where the behavior science component of it comes into. And there are a couple different strategies that we use in autism fitness programming that are highly predictably successful. One is utilizing behavior specific praise. So we are adamant about not using the great job, great job, good job, good job. It's like when you acknowledge someone based on exactly what they're doing. So that individual who I have, in a one-to-one program doing an overhead press, while they're doing it, I'm coaching them and say, oh, awesome overhead press. You're going super slow, great control. So what I'm doing there is I'm tying in meaning. Like they are being acknowledged that they are doing something really well while they're doing it. And that's the way to increase, that's one way to increase the reinforcing nature of that particular exercise. So when something is abstract or it's not directly tied to a reinforcer, you have to build in a reinforcer there. So that's one way we do it. Another way we do it is tying it to other tangible reinforcers, and usually it's just like taking a break or doing a preferred activity, or even engaging the individual as the human being that they are. A lot of our athletes have very specific and very narrow fields of interest. So I'll talk to my athlete about their fascination about trains, or their fascination about anime, or whatever that thing is for them. If they can use me as a conduit for talking about this thing, even if we're not necessarily having like a back and forth, and it's more them talking at me than than talking with, I'll take it, because that's something that is reinforcing for them. It's something that keeps them actively engaged and a participant in the process. So that's something. Those are two things that we utilize. Another thing is choice, and autonomy is a big deal for a lot of individuals on the autism spectrum. And so, if if I have a board set up for an athlete, if it's a dry race board and I have the exercises listed out for them, and I say, okay, which one do you want to do first? Do you want to do a medicine ball overhead throw, or do you want to do a push throw first? I don't care which one. And from a programming perspective, it's not going to change anything, but it gives them a sense of control and ownership over the program, which is a big deal. And for a lot of individuals on the autism spectrum, that is not something that they have in their daily lives. So if I can build these things in, a sense of autonomy, a sense of control, the relationship that I'm developing with that athlete, where there is trust, where there's effective communication, then we're scaffolding all of these beneficial and enjoyable and reinforcing aspects around the fitness program.
And do you think that that is almost like putting a little penny in the picky jar, so to speak, of like when you start stacking up those wins, there is going to be even more buy-in and interest from them in that session and then in sessions following. So like this becomes like a very positive habit of, oh, now I enjoy this physiological feeling of exercise because I'm with Eric and I can talk about trains and I can choose my exercise and he listens to me and we're having this really fun conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. And what you're describing is something that in applied behavior analysis we call behavioral momentum, and that's where, okay, if you're reinforced for doing one thing, you're more likely to do it again, and then you're more apt and more ready for the challenge of the next thing as well. So it's building up a reserve of trust and capability and confidence. Really, it's funny when we attempt to operationally define something like confidence. Like, what does it look like for somebody who does have a processing delay and they are limited in their expressive uh, verbal language, and it may be difficult at any given time to really assess how they're feeling or how they're experiencing something. But when you see them take the initiative and they just walk into the gym and walk right over to the board and are ready to go, okay, clearly something is happening, and we have to be careful about how much we extrapolate from that. But in the observable, okay, they are present, they are focused, they're choosing different exercises. There's a very short delay between them checking the board and then walking over and grabbing the dumbbells and starting to do their overhead presses. So that confidence factor is a big one, and that's only going to happen in the process of adding all of these essentials to the program. And that's regardless of whether you're working with someone who has a level 3 autism diagnosis or a level 1 autism diagnosis. These things still need to be in the programming. The relative degree to which we need to rely on them is going to be based on that individual's physical, adaptive, and cognitive skills, as we assess them.
So one thing that you had, said before is that you try and get away from like the very general good job or great job and you try and relate it a little bit more to what they're doing. They may be a little bit more detail oriented or data driven, so to speak, with respect to what they're maybe hyper focused on. Do you think that there's also something that could be said as far as like meaningful effort? Like they always say that when you have kids, you're not supposed to say like, oh, good boy or good girl. It's like, hey, like you worked really hard on that. That's great that you showed a lot of effort. You showed a lot of friendship. You showed a lot of heart. Is that something that's also very beneficial in these
Yeah,
relationships?
it's the same thing, and these again are universal behavioral aspects of human behavior and performance as well. The problem with great job or good boy or good girl is that it's so vague in nature that it's not, again, really tied to anything meaningful. So if I say, oh, great job, yeah, great job, what? And when you have someone who has so much competing stimuli sometimes, they may be doing, again, that overhead press, but they're also shuffling their feet while they're doing it. So when I say great job, is it great job, doing the overhead press while you're shuffling your feet? So the more specific we can be towards what someone is doing well, because it's very easy. I use the example of getting, a birthday card from someone. You ever get, the generic Hallmark card and it just says happy birthday, you're a special person. And you're like, yeah, all right, great. And then it goes into the paper shredder. But if you get a,
Yeah, there's no money
handwritten,
inside of it. Just
right.
throw the
It's
money.
yeah, exactly. There's not, that's what it really matters. Is there a vanilla gift card that you're going to spend, $99.87. And then you're like, damn it, I have 13 cents left on this thing. Bad example. When you get that card and it's like, oh, happy birthday, and it's the minimum effort of acknowledgement. We want the maximum effort of acknowledgement. And the maximum effort of acknowledgement means that you are actually watching, actually listening, actually participating, and involved. So if you're actually watching and listening, then you can say, oh, great grip on that farmer's walk. Like you are, everything pertains to specificity. Like, what exactly are they doing in the moment that is benefiting them and that we would like to see repeat itself? And you can do that. You can test it out with friends and family also, instead of saying, oh, you're great. Okay, why? Like adding, when we teach it in the certification program, it's okay, great job, but then fill in the blank. You have a blank that needs to be covered by something. So we toss out the great jobification of things, and you really need to focus on what are they doing well in the moment. What do we want to see happening again? Because you can use that. It's such a um, a an opportunity, and oftentimes a missed opportunity, to use it as a teaching tool also in giving feedback. Like, great bench press, you kept the bar right at chest level, great tempo, that looked awesome. Giving people a strategy for understanding not only what they're doing but how they're doing it.
Yeah, that immediate feedback seems to be incredibly
Yep.
important.
Yep.
So what is I'm interested to see, like, what is the certification involve specifically, and like how have you been able to integrate that? I'm probably like nationally, maybe even internationally.
Yeah, yeah. So I launched the certification in 2017, and what I recognized early on was what the fitness industry needed was yet another certification. So I'm like, yeah, we need the 100,000th fitness certification out there. But actually, that when I launched it, I was hesitant to launch a yet another certification, because working with this population, there are very um, important considerations and challenges. So I was hesitant about it at first, because I didn't want to give anybody a false sense of confidence, and I also want ultimately, I'm not even ultimately I'm less concerned with the person taking the certification than the person who they're delivering the program to. So I'm thinking about, like, the end client or the end athlete. Like, what are they getting when we turn a person out into the world who has this certification? So I had to work backwards from that standpoint of creating a certification for professionals and parents and family members who may not necessarily have a background in fitness, or may not necessarily have a background in behavior science, and fuse everything together in a way where it was conducive to them taking the information and being able to utilize it in, have a working knowledge and be effective. So what I initially launched, and it was like this for years up until COVID, was a 2-day intensive training program that also had uh, reading materials and video. And then during COVID, I had to revamp the course, obviously, because we couldn't meet in person, but it actually wound up being a better version of the program, because I created an online course that had over 15 hours. So it was a lot more information that I had always wanted to add about the physical, the exercises themselves and programming, the adaptive, so it's the positive behavior support and the strategies that we use, and then the cognitive, which is coaching and communication. So I was able to expand the curriculum and add more to it. And then we also have a full day hands-on practical that people can attend virtually or in person. And now, um, you know, 8+ something years later, we have over 600 certified pros in 10 different countries. I've taught on 3 different continents, and it's still something that is emerging also, because I'll get an email or I'll get a communication on Instagram from a parent who are looking for a certified coach in an area. And when I go back to my database, I'm like, I don't have anybody there. It's more fuel for me to say, look, we need to continue to get the information and the practice out there to people who are capable of delivering it at a very high level. So what I want to do and continue to do through the certification is just have the highest possible standards and practices in integrating, um, resistance-based fitness training for this population of all ages and ability levels. But you certainly know this from being in the industry for a while. The idea of, or the premise of having industry standards is practically non-existent, particularly in the US. It's a little bit different in some other countries. But that being the case, how do we develop something that is known as the industry standard across industries as well, that utilizes a best practices model and can really be reliable, whether we're talking about outcome measures and data collection, and using the most up to date and person centered practices as possible.
Yeah, it's I can't imagine the uphill battle with that and like the ongoing challenges to navigate, because it's funny that you ended off with that, because a lot of the people I speak with who are in this like exercise science, nutrition, physiology space, a lot of us are like, okay, like we're over the whole like, you know, the kind of fakers online who want to sell their
Mm-hmm.
programs and
Mm-hmm.
say that, they're experts in this or that. And I think for the most part, it's pretty harmless if someone's like, oh, I'm the best personal trainer, I have this supplement, yada, yada, yada.
Yeah, yeah,
But as we're seeing now, it's like when you're dealing with populations, not only is there like the huge athletic component, which is it can get dangerous with like an overhead press or a squat or a bent over
yeah.
row or something. But now we're with autistic and neurodivergent populations who need that personal touch and that care and that experience of saying, how do we give the best possible care with them while integrating exercise? And that's not something you can fake. That's not something you can
Oh,
just watch
totally.
a video on. I mean, holy cow, there's a lot to deal with there.
Well, I would actually, and unfortunate, it's unfortunate to be in the position to push back against that, but you can fake it, and I've seen it, because fitness, particularly strength training, is um, such a misunderstood topic, or completely non-understood topic among a lot of, when I say like the autism population, I'm also including family members and other professionals, that the state of the industry, and I think it's gotten a little bit better, but someone can post, I've seen plenty of these examples, they can post, oh, this is special needs fitness, or this is fitness for autistic populations, doing what I could easily categorize as horrendous exercises with terrible form and really poor coaching techniques. But because it is labeled, autistic fitness, everybody's like, in this, social media, everybody's like, yay, that's so great, because they don't understand. That's the issue, is that you can't, and this is what really drives me insane, is that people can get away with it, because if you put it under this label of, oh, it's special needs fitness, so therefore in a lot of people's minds, oh, it must be good, because if this person is doing it, how could they possibly do it if they weren't good at what they did? So there's a false idea of professional credibility and capability. And I don't know if it's just necessarily relegated to social media. I would hope that it is, but I think for a lot of families, if they're interested in this sort of thing, then there are so few practitioners out there that if someone is just like willing to to work with their son or their daughter. And I've heard these stories from parents too, and they're nightmarish. They're like, oh yeah, we worked with a personal trainer for a little while, but they would always kind of yell at at them, and they tried to like boot camp it. And I'll ask, well, how long did you work with them? Oh, for about 4 months. And I'm thinking, you should have been out of there in the first day like that. But that's not knowing when you have a consumer that doesn't have a high expectation of a professional. Like, I like to use the example of, if you go to I always think about this, I don't know why. If you go to the dentist, right, and the dentist just has a toothbrush, and they're like, and you come in and they just brush they just brush your teeth, and then they're just kind of like hitting your cheek, and then they don't do anything else, and then you leave, and you're like, that wasn't a good dentist. But people don't have the same. This is why I talk about standards and practices. People don't have the same standards for personal training, regardless of the population. I hope that they do. I hope that we get to a point where someone can go to a practitioner and they're like, nah, this isn't a good fit. But
No,
we're
it's
very
it's
far from
interesting.
there.
I love that analogy so much, and it reminds me of I went to the gym a couple weeks ago with my girlfriend. We always go at nights, and
Mhm.
there's always like it's like a regular copy and paste box gym. You can
Yeah.
insert whatever name you want; doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
But one of the personal trainers there was training this man who looked to be around 60, like central adiposity, out of breath, red skin. I'm thinking, okay, you're probably like overweight, maybe high blood pressure, high cholesterol. Okay, you have metabolic syndrome. You're 60 years old, predisposing yourself for a cardiovascular event. How do we train this person? And my girlfriend and I are doing leg curls, and we're switching off on the machine, just doing like straight sets, 8 to 12 reps,
Yep.
no big deal.
Hmm.
And the trainer has this guy doing a triple drop set of leg extensions next to us, and is like barking in his ears, like, "Oh, just get a couple more. Oh, just get a couple more. Oh, just get a." And I'm like
Hmm.
thinking,
Yeah.
this guy's dealing with probably lipid medications and high blood pressure meds and statins, and he doesn't need to be doing a triple drop set on leg extensions. Like, we got to get this guy up and walking and doing some large,
Yeah.
big compound functional
Yeah.
movements. And it's like, she looked at me and she goes, does that drive you nuts because you're an anatomy professor? And I was like, nah, I shrug it off because I'm sure the guy's fine. But like, when we're dealing with a population that may not know specifically how to advocate for themselves, or maybe if a parent or a guardian or family or friend doesn't know how to advocate for them, what do we do about that? And like, now you're opening my eyes to this a bit, going, holy cow, like there might be some really ineffective practitioners and programs that we have to kind
Yeah.
of throw the flag on, say, all right, that's a 15-yard penalty.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. And I think there's the selfless, and then there's the selfish aspect. The selfless is, if a family is looking for a qualified trainer or a professional to deliver these services, I don't want them to have to worry about it, because if you have a very high standard, and effective ongoing training, then that is going to be less a factor if if you raise the level of practice. The selfish one is the conversations that I have to have around this, or when people send me, oh, look at this, oh, is this like Autism Fitness? Like, no, this is so far. Like, as a trainer, because when everybody's a trainer, and the landscape of ineffective to highly effective, we know for the most part. But to a lay or inexperienced population, it's like, well, you guys are both trainers. It's like, no, no. But again, that's very difficult when you're in this industry, because in other areas of, and you could apply it to anything. And I'm sure anybody in any field will say, well, just look at my, I'm sure an attorney can say, yeah, there are different levels. And I'm sure that's true. But the baseline skill set in a lot of other fields, even in healthcare, the baseline for being a general physician or a pediatrician is very high. And it doesn't necessarily have to be at that level, but it has to be somewhere, particularly when you're talking about more vulnerable or more higher need populations. And you can talk about autism. You can also talk about, to your point, geriatric, populations as well. Is that trainer more of a danger to that gentleman doing drop sets than a benefit? And that's a real question, and it's an important question. So um, it's a challenge when everything is perceivably the same, when in reality there are stark differences. Like it's like saying, well, any exercise is good. And it comes back to specificity. That's simply not true. That you need to have context around it.
So what were some of like the early pushbacks and challenges that you had like in like the early days, if you can think back that far, as far as like, ooh,
Yeah,
like this was tough to get buy-in potentially from people who believed in this. I don't know.
it was mostly to get buy-in from people who didn't understand it. It's like, and if you look at us, and going into the kind of cliche thing of we're an inactive population on a whole, but that's true. And so people who don't exercise and don't train don't have and there's not a judgment call, it's just the reality. They're not going to have the same level of of interest, understanding, and experience with exercise than people who do. And since the majority of people in this country do not train, they are not going to have the same level of deference or prioritization of fitness programming. And I think because there are so many challenges for many individuals on the autism spectrum and their families, and early on it's, oh, we got to get speech therapy, we got to get behavior therapy, we got to get occupational and then physical therapy, and education, and all of these things are really important. But what happens is, if you keep saying, oh yeah, fitness sounds great, but then that's why I get an email from a parent who says, oh, my son or daughter is 27, 28, or 35, and I've noticed they've been sedentary now. Like, well, if we had the consideration of importance for this, like, okay, as soon as they're out of occupational or physical therapy, if in fact they're in those, we bridge that gap and we go right into general motor planning and strength. Because I think about, I work with ages 12 and up, right? So most of the athletes that I work with one to one fall into, like, the late teens, 20s and 30s. And I always think, imagine if they had started, basic squat, push, pull, carry, all the rudimentary stuff that works. Imagine they'd started this when they were 12 or 13. Like, the things that I could program for this athlete, and nothing, crazy, but the what I could build on that. But we're starting, oftentimes at a deficit, both strength and motor skill wise, because when I get someone who's 28, 29, and they've never had any type of fitness, they've never had anything, physical, um, it creates a situation where we have to track backwards first and work on a lot of this motor planning stuff, and that can take years.
It's interesting, hearing that. And that was like one of the things I wanted to touch upon was how much, I guess, is there going to be these potentially, hopefully, positive changes along the maturity lifeline? Because like
Mhm.
if you like, I don't know, maybe you've like a kid or something, it's like, oh, like they're 4 years old, and there's a big difference between 4, 5, 6, and 7 and 8 with someone who is on the autism spectrum disorder and
Yeah.
is neurodivergent. Um,
Yeah.
do we see varying amounts of maturity as they grow up? I mean, that's obviously like the big finger crosser
Yeah.
right there of like, hopefully. But like, I mean, I used to babysit a kid who was autistic when he was 4, 5, and 6, and now the young man is in college, and it's amazing. And
Mhm.
like, I'm just saying, I'm
Yeah.
like, did I know him a little bit more as a 4, 5, and 6 year old, or was it a 4, 5, and 6 year old with autism? And now I'm seeing this bright young man who is a little obsessive about things and has autism, but is brilliant and is driving his own car and he's going to college and he's making all these friends and doing everything. Are we seeing this huge change, and is fitness like hopefully helping that? That's why we need to start at a very young age.
I'll give you the annoying answer first, and then I'll qualify it. So it depends
Give me
very
as
much
much
on the.
detail as possible.
Yeah, yeah, it depends on the individual. So if you have an individual who is nonverbal or selectively mute or has very limited. And by the way, this is not necessarily an indication of cognitive functioning also, which is why we have to, parse these out and separate them, because one skill doesn't necessarily, translate into a deficit or a strength in another skill. So we have to examine them, or assess them separately. But the prognosis over time and skill development is largely individualized. So you can have an individual who has, significant delays at, 3, 4, 5 years old, and they get a lot of intervention. They get, great, behavior therapy, speech therapy, all of these things. And they will have my early intervention is, from my understanding, the best indicator of higher skill acquisition and performance, later into adolescence and teen and adult years as well. But then, we're talking about, um, you know, neurology, which is a very, very dense and complicated field, and I won't pretend to be anywhere near an expert on it at all. But it's really going to come down to that particular individual and their particular traits and skill set. I like to describe it as kind of a row of not on off switches but dimmer switches. So you may have a skill set like cognitive processing that is, starts off at a 3, but they get, effective um, educational support, and now we bump it up to a 5, and they're, processing a little bit quicker. They can process more information. So I don't necessarily know that there is and there could be great research on this that I'm just not aware of, but that there's necessarily a change that comes with age and development. I'm sure there is, but it's going to be largely independent on those different skills and capabilities, when a particular individual is 5 versus when they're 15.
No, I mean that's I love the idea of like those like dimmer switches, and it's always going to be different like by specific case. And I mean, it seems like you've had quite the like uphill battles, but you've had like some really really awesome wins with people on like 3 different continents, and all these different populations. Is there? I'm interested to know, because I feel like there's something that can be said for the process of doing something and then the complete outcome. What you're doing, it sounds like what you're doing is a day to day thing, which is
Mhm.
immensely important. And then I guess, like, I mean, I volunteered a few times at like a Special Olympics, and I know some of those athletes train quite a bit, but other ones just show up on the day and do it, which is
Yes.
amazing. But it sounds like you're doing like the day to day work, 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 which will help them the 364 other days of the year before that potential
Yeah.
competing or just whatever it might be. Can you speak to that?
Yeah. No, that's a great question. It's just a great encapsulation, but it's a great question also. So my initial answer is, if you had a friend who came up to you and said, I want to get in shape, I'm gonna start going to the gym, and I have a program, and you say, great, awesome, and they say, I'm gonna go once a month. You're like, well, in terms of of the science of, training effect, and like, that's not going to work. So, and that's why I don't like one of events. And I don't like one of events because oftentimes the false narrative or takeaway, again, it's not bad, but it's just not conducive to any type of physiological, like doing anything for, 45 minutes one day out of a month is not going to result in any type of training effect or any type of change whatsoever. So the idea of, oh, we're going to do this fitness event, I think, like, operational definitions and naming stuff and calling things what they actually are really important to me, and I think that's why I gravitated so much towards behavior analysis, because you need to define this and you need to define the definition of this so that we can all be very clear on what we're speaking to. And calling, I don't think that by the nature of this, there is such a thing as a fitness event. There's a moving around a lot event, but nobody wants to call it that. And So when you say it's a, you know, fitness event or it's a sports event, no, it's a one of that's using this thing as, you know, as an activity, but no fitness is actually happening. It's just, it's impossible. It's physiologically impossible. And then of course there's the, well, yeah, but we're calling it, no, 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 no. You're moving around a lot. You're using fitness as an activity. You're using exercise as an activity, but it is not a fitness event because to your point, you need something that is much more consistent, and
Yeah.
that's it.
No, it was interesting because like I'm a part of like the ACSM right now, and there's a few of us at school. We take our students to do like volunteering at the Special Olympics down in Central Florida. It's a really beautiful thing, but there was just something that kind of clicked in my head where I was like, I became accustomed with your work and what you do, and I thought about it in the sense of like, okay, I always don't like training someone for like one single race who's like, oh, I want to run a half marathon or a full
Yeah,
marathon because
yeah,
it's a bet. And most of the time they
right.
don't do it because it's an external validation and they're not doing the whole like identity change of like, I'm going to start eating healthier. I'm going to be
Hmm.
consistent. I'm going to start training. And like, I think the beautiful thing about like Special Olympics, from what I know about, is like, okay, it's like a bringing together, and it's looking at sport in the context of anyone and everyone can participate, which is beautiful. But what I saw with your work and why I wanted to have a conversation with you immediately, I was like, hey, like you're focusing on the day-to-day process. And even like when I ask my students, how do you feel after you exercise? And they're like, oh, I feel great. And I'm like, okay, let's break this down hormonally. Let's talk about, endocannabinoids. Let's talk about endorphins. Let's talk about brain derived neurotropic factor. If everyone can get that daily dose, if it's 30 minutes, an hour, like every single day of the week, I mean, your blood pressure is going to be lower. You're going to be happier. You're going to have more focus throughout the day. And what we're seeing now with what your research and what your work is doing is that in these neurodivergent and autism spectrum disorder populations, that these folks are getting the exact same benefit. So why focus on like this one pinnacle day? Why don't we implement these processes every day to raise the baseline from like a 40% to a 50% to a 60% to a 70%?
Yeah. Well, I think there are a couple factors. The number one is again coming back to the operational definition, what you say you do versus what you actually do. So if you're creating fitness or sports events, then that's fine. But I think there needs to be a clear understanding of what the intent is, because sometimes the intent is, oh, we want a social opportunity, but we're going to use, like exercises or fitness activities or whatever as a conduit to that. Okay, fine, but then your main focus is not fitness, it's using exercises as a way for individuals to socialize. Fine, but that's different. It's very different from a comprehensive scalable fitness program. The other thing is coming back to something that you had mentioned earlier, or a word that I highlighted when you were talking, participation. So when you volunteer at one of these events, I'm sure you've seen individuals who show up with their families, and maybe during a race or during an event, they participate for a grand total of like 15 or 20 seconds. And that's it, because that's their baseline right now. And that's where they are. That's it. But they are there for the event. They participate for like, let's say 30 seconds or even 3 minutes. And then again, assigning a definition to it. It's like, oh yeah, they participated and they did this event. They did, if we're looking at it objectively, they did 30 seconds or 3 minutes, whatever. Let's be generous. They did 3 minutes of total physical activity over the course of 2 hours. And now we're calling it this thing that it's not. They participated. Great. They had a good time and they had a positive interaction with other peers and with volunteers. Great. But it's not fitness. And if someone wants to argue that or they want to debate, I am happy to have that debate. Because if we want to just break it down, numbers wise, but again, I think that it's, I don't want to go so far as to call it like dangerous, but it's misguided. And the problem with that is a family that, and again, this is not a judgment call, but a family that says, oh, well, once a month we do Special Olympics, thinking that there's going to be an actual physiological change, and that's enough to stimulate some type um, of ongoing physical benefit. It's just not true. It's impossible. It is physiologically impossible for that to happen.
And I think that I honestly think coming because I have no stake in the game here.
Mhm.
I think that that's a very healthy debate to have, and it's like a healthy in like the literal and like the I don't know, yeah, I guess like literal sense of like a healthy debate because you're saying like okay, like when I remember like the last time I volunteered, they were doing like this golfing thing, and there was it was
Mhm.
on like a putting green, and there was like I don't know 8 holes or whatever it was, and it was wonderful to see all these different families coming out and these kids doing these different things. But again, it was like you tee up and you hit the ball once,
Yes.
and then
Uh-huh.
like 30 minutes later you hit the ball again. And I was like,
Yes.
most of the day it was us standing out in the Florida sun,
Yes.
drenched in sweat, and I was like,
One.
this just sucks. Like this isn't fun.
I
This isn't
just
exercise.
I just saw the same thing with an autism education program, like a school, and put up on social. Oh, we did baseball day. I'm like, okay, let me see this. And what is baseball? Okay, you get at maximum what, like four at bats. Okay, so it's like I have a visceral response to calling things, especially in the exercise realm, because I love this. I love this science. I love this practice. Calling something when it's not, and they're like, okay, our students had a great day playing baseball, and got physically active. It's like, no, they took like two swings, every half hour, and then that was it. They probably got two or three at bats, and you're like, oh, now they're physically active and they're playing baseball. No, they did this with their forearms like six times and then they stood there. I'll have that debate because if someone is outside the realm of reality, it'll be interesting. But I think you have to have a certain you either have less of a knowledge base and understanding of how human physiology and exercise science works, or you just want to double down on what you're doing because that's what people do.
I think that that's virtue signaling. Really, it's just kind of like, oh, like here, like we're going to do this amazing thing and let's get like, all this attention for it. It's like, okay, like that is a positive thing. But if we take that a step further and
Yeah,
actually look at what's our goal, and our goal is to live a long, healthy life
yeah,
for every single person, not just one specific subset. Right.
yeah.
So it's like maybe we can rethink this whole thing and actually get the exercise and the diet involved, not so much as far as like the baseball day. We need to have a lot of background homework to that.
Yeah, I would be, and this is a rare instance for me, but I would be a little bit more generous than that. I would say that they're using baseball because it's a sport, and sports are highly normalized in our society. So it looks like they are doing something neurotypical. So that there's high reinforcement and understanding for that, and you know. Unless they've gone through my program, and they can differentiate. And there's another big one. I know we don't have time for it today, but another big differentiation between general fitness and then sports, because there's a big difference between those two, that those are two completely separate categories. um, Unless there is an understanding of that, then the default setting is, oh, let's play basketball, let's play baseball, we were talking before the interview. I'm 5'6". I have zero interest in basketball or distance running. Like, it's just, that's not. But when you say, okay, well, this sport, this is for everybody. Show me how you scale it. For everybody participating. And I think sports are unfortunately like we go backwards in society because we've started kids off playing sports when they could get, like, kids who are in gymnastics and like ninja courses when they're young and do it for years. Those are the kids who develop really good movement skills. Why? Because it's general, and there's squatting and climbing and jumping and all of this great, very um, varied and global movement development, as opposed to kick this ball or swing this bat, because those are hyper specific physical activities. I i think that it's less virtue signaling, or that could be that, than the paucity of information. And it's easy to get out a bunch of bases and get out a bunch of wiffle bats and get out a bunch of a tee and a bunch of wiffle balls and just say, hey, we're doing something, especially when you don't know any better.
I know. I love that. That's very fair justification for
And
that.
I
Yeah.
hate to be fair, but I have to here.
I don't like being nice. No, no, and I
I
get it.
just
And
no,
like
I
you're
don't.
no, but I get it too. It's like you're really doing something that's you've been doing this for like over 20 years and something that's very beautiful, but you are at an uphill battle. And even just now in 2025, I think we're beginning to have these conversations about people who have autism and people who are neurodivergent. I mean, there was a few TV shows like on Netflix, and then there's the other one with and that's new. I mean, I remember going to summer camp when I was 5 years old, and there was always like an advocate with one kid who had like autism. And every year is like, I was 5, 6, 7 going to camp, and I always ask my mom, like, what's up with this kid? He's crying a lot. He's
Hmm.
doing all these weird things. And she'd be like, listen, like, not everyone is the exact same, and that's a beautiful thing. You have to be his friend. And like that was the conversation 20 years ago. And now it's much different. So I think we are heading in the right direction. But I mean, I really thank you for everything that you've been doing over the past 20 years. And I'll be excited to see what you and your team continue to do in the future now that it's more mainstream talked about, because this is really moving the needle in the right direction.
Yeah, I think so, and I think the public discourse has gotten a lot better. There's always that's what progress is. It's never going to be perfect, but I'd say it's a lot better than it was, 20 when I first started out. It's when you said autism, oh, like Rain Man, and now people don't even know what that is because it's a movie from I don't know 19 somewhere in the early 80s, I guess. But I like that that's no longer the reference point anymore. And now it's, oh, have you, people will ask me, oh, have you seen Love on the Spectrum? Um,
Yeah, that's
and
the
I
show.
haven't.
That's the one. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and I haven't. You know why? Not because it has to do with autism, because I hate those kind of shows. That's all. I don't watch it because I'm not interested. But I like the fact that there is in the zeitgeist this larger, I think predominantly positive. I'm just talking about from the social and cultural perspective, awareness of autism. Now we just have to start connecting it to, to fitness and quality of life too. I will say that the conversation for me has gotten a lot better because now people again have a much better baseline understanding, or at least from like the gestalt, like general, oh yeah, autism. Like, okay, my neighbor, my cousin, or I've seen this show, or, they'll mention, some celebrity or something who, undoubtedly I've never heard of. But I think the conversation has gotten a lot broader. It's gotten a lot better. It's gotten a lot broader, but more nuanced at the same time. So I think we're heading towards a better understanding, but we still need to create the groundwork still needs to be done um, for things like vocation and housing and long-term care. And I'm biased here, but I think fitness is a large component of that conversation too, because you think about, and I bring this up a lot now in conversations and presentations because I've had it happen, in my own life with family members. You talk about, well, in terms of geriatrics, what's the first thing that you think about as, as a potential factor in quality of life? Go
One
ahead,
thing that I
sir.
think about
Yeah,
is like anything from falls to high blood pressure to like
that's
what
exactly
falls.
what I was
Yeah.
looking for.
Well, it's the
Yeah,
number one leading cause of death at like over 65
right.
or whatever it is, right?
Exactly. So you think about someone falls once and the family members are kind of on alert. They fall twice and everybody's like, do they need care? They fall three times and they're in a home. And you think about someone with autism and again this 16-year gap. Okay, if they fall at if they fall and they're 55 or 56, and nonverbal, they don't necessarily have to be, but you are putting someone at risk that doesn't necessarily have to be at that risk. If only, and I'm really abstaining from being as dramatic as possible, but if only for the fact that we were to add in 30 or 45 minutes of strength training 2 or 3 times a week for them, that we could largely avoid. And we're not doing that. And we're not doing that because fitness isn't given the proper consideration that it needs, not just for the autism population, I think in general, but stronger equals safer. And that's not just, for meme purposes. It's true. We just have to adopt a system in which that is in which it's a priority.
Absolutely. Yeah. I love that. And it's, I do think that we are like heading in that right direction. And even just, I still love the way that you put it as far as like, the, the dentist, if some dentist like goes and brushes your teeth, you're like, it's ineffective. And I love that idea too. It's just like, we can apply that really to anything. And if I always tell like my students, I'm like, if you love your parents, if you love your grandparents or aunts and uncles, you would, really gently, lovingly nudge them to like get to the gym a couple times a week, to have an extra serving of protein, an extra serving of like fruits and veggies. And I think we should be, really reinforcing that in every population. I think you're really spearheading this charge. So I think it's really great. I know
Thank you.
in the
Yeah.
interest of time here, I want to have you back on again. I have so many things more I want
Yeah.
to ask.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Um, where can people get in touch with you?
I'm pretty easy to get in touch with. Autismfitness.com for everything pertaining to the certification, consulting, and then I am quite active on Instagram. So at the Autism Fitness on Instagram, and then the Autism Fitness on YouTube.
Awesome, Eric. This was awesome. Thank you very much for coming on today, and I'm
You got it, Dr. Matt.
excited.
Thanks for great questions too. I always appreciate really good questions. So thank you.
I'll be excited to keep the conversation going.
Yeah.
All righty.